A single bourbon joke from a prime minister just revealed the most quietly devastating trade rupture of the decade. And the numbers behind it are staggering. My name is David, and welcome to Global Conflict Feed. What you're about to hear isn't a story about alcohol. It's a story about economic warfare, strategic pivots, and one nation quietly rewiring itself while the cameras were pointed elsewhere. Let's start with the raw damage. Between March and December of 2025, American spirits exports to Canada didn't dip or soften. They collapsed. $143 million evaporated in 9 months. Jack Daniel's, Wild Turkey, Tito's Vodka, all pulled from store shelves across 8 of Canada's 10 provinces. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Most of those shelves are still empty today. Now you might be thinking, was it the tariffs? Because Canada did impose a 25% retaliatory tariff on American alcohol back in March of 2025. But Canada lifted that tariff in late August. The financial penalty? Gone. The shelves? Still bare. 8 of 10 provincial liquor boards, the government-run bodies that are the sole authorized sellers of wine, beer, and spirits in most of Canada, looked at the removal of that tariff and said, "We're not done yet." They kept the ban voluntarily. That is not a trade dispute. That is a declaration. So what exactly is the cost? Let's put real numbers to it. In 2024, Canada was the second largest export market for American spirits on the entire planet. Not second in North America, second globally, behind only the European Union. Canada was importing $238 million worth of American spirits annually. Bourbon, whiskey, vodka flowing across the border in volumes American distillers had come to depend on. It was a record year. Then came the collapse. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States published their full year 2025 numbers. American spirits exports to Canada, $89 million, down from $238 million. Canada, the world's second largest market, fell to number 6. It didn't edge downward. It dropped 4 positions in 12 months. Eric Gregory, president of the Kentucky Distillers Association, described what that meant for his state's signature industry. He said his state's exports had reached a 10-year low for whiskey. An industry that had been climbing for a decade straight had just recorded its worst export year in a generation. And then Jim Beam stopped distilling. Jim Beam is not some craft startup. It is a 230-year-old brand. It survived Prohibition. It survived 2 world wars. It survived every recession and market shift across 2 centuries of American commercial history. In late 2025, its parent company halted distilling operations at the flagship Claremont, Kentucky facility, not permanently, but for a defined period tied directly to collapsing export demand and record inventory buildup. Kentucky alone had 16 million barrels of excess bourbon sitting in warehouses, and the exit route that was supposed to clear that inventory, exporting it, had been shut down, not by an active tariff, by the deliberate choices of Canadian provincial boards that had already decided the tariff removal changed nothing. This is the backdrop against which Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney walked onto a stage in Montreal on the 11th of April, 2026, and asked a single question to a room full of Liberal Party delegates. Had anyone had any bourbon lately? The room erupted. But Carney didn't pull that line from thin air. He pulled it from the Distilled Spirits Council report. He pulled it from 8 provincial liquor boards. He pulled it from a Kentucky industry executive describing a 10-year export low. He pulled it from a Jim Beam facility that had gone quiet. What looked like a punchline was actually a progress report, a data point delivered as comedy by a man who spent decades as a central banker and knows precisely what a 70% export collapse means. But the speech didn't stop at bourbon. The moment that brought the entire convention hall to its feet came when Carney turned to military procurement. He declared that the era of Canada directing 70% of every military capital dollar toward American suppliers was finished. Standing ovation in a Liberal Party convention for a line about defense spending. Let's understand what that actually means because the scale is significant. Roughly 70% of Canada's military capital spending has historically flowed to American contractors. That figure didn't emerge through corruption or carelessness. It emerged because American defense systems are advanced, compatible with NATO interoperability requirements, and backed by the largest defense industrial base in the world. Canada bought American because American made strategic sense. Carney is now saying that logic has expired, and he has backed it with a number. Over the next 10 years, Canada will direct 180 billion Canadian dollars into military procurement and 290 billion into defense-related infrastructure, with the explicit intention of redirecting that spending away from American firms toward Canadian companies, European partners, and a newly joined European Defence Initiative. That initiative is called SAFE, Security Action for Europe. In December of 2025, Canada became the first non-European Union member ever admitted to it. The program unlocks $170 billion in pooled European loans for military hardware covering missiles, artillery systems, drone and counter-drone technology, cyber capabilities, and air defense systems. Canada went to Brussels. Canada joined a European Defense Fund. Canada did this while remaining a United States treaty ally, because the state of the relationship with Washington had deteriorated to the point where that step felt not just reasonable, but necessary. Now let's talk about what all of this is actually aimed at, because there is a defined arena where this leverage is meant to land. CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, successor to NAFTA, is formally up for review in 2026. That review is not a cordial diplomatic check-in. It is a renegotiation window with real, measurable stakes. The Eurasia Group described the likely outcome bluntly in their top risks assessment. CUSMA will neither be cleanly extended nor terminated. Instead, it will stagger forward as what analysts have called a zombie agreement, neither fully alive nor dead, while sectoral tariffs on autos, steel, and aluminum continue to serve as pressure tools in ongoing negotiations. That is the terrain Carney is navigating, and he is navigating it having already shifted Canada's strategic position in ways that weren't possible before March of 2025. On the trade side, he is committed to doubling Canada's non-American exports over the next decade. On the defense side, the European SAFE membership is already operational. On the political side, 5 members of parliament have crossed the floor to join his Liberal caucus, including a former Conservative, signaling that his political coalition is widening rather than narrowing. A poll conducted by Spark Advocacy found that 25% of Canadians now actively support exploring European Union membership, and 58% believe it warrants serious consideration. That number essentially didn't exist 3 years ago. It exists now because sustained economic pressure, annexation rhetoric, and a year of trade conflict has moved public opinion in directions that would have seemed impossible before 2025. Carney is not pursuing EU membership. He has not suggested it. But the fact that a quarter of the country is now willing to consider it tells you everything about how fundamentally the relationship between these two nations has shifted. Here is what all of this adds up to, and why it matters beyond the bilateral story. The Bourbon boycott and the defense procurement pivot are not two separate stories wearing similar clothes. They are the same story. They are Canada telling the United States, in the only language that registers during a trade war, that it has options, that it is exercising them, and that the cost of what Washington started can be named, quantified, and pointed at on a map. Whether Carney secures a working majority, whether CUSMA survives its review window, whether European defense integration delivers real results on the timeline he's promising, all of those remain open questions. But one thing is not open. The Canada that walks into those negotiations is not the same Canada that existed before March of 2025. The shelves changed, the procurement contracts changed, and the political math changed. If this breakdown gave you the full picture you weren't getting elsewhere, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who want analysis this deep. This is Global Conflict Feed. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, Because the Kuzma renegotiation window is opening and will be here for every move. Because the numbers are real, the numbers are still moving, and somebody in Kentucky is watching very carefully to see whether those Canadian shelves ever get restocked.